So first, I want to express my thanks actually to the International Transport Forum for having included this workshop devoted to transport CO2 emission in emerging economies. And indeed, coming from the World Bank, of course, this is a subject dear to our hearts. So I am Marc Juhel. I'm the sector manager for transport in the World Bank. And really, I believe it quite necessary to open up those questions in the overall developing country context, and this afternoon in particular to the emerging economies aspects. There are, in fact, a number of intertwined issues in this. And the objective of this workshop, as stated by the ITS Secretariat, is essentially to explore the potential for and constraints on reducing CO2 emissions in some of the world's largest and most rapidly growing economies, and to examine appropriate policies. And we'll hear actually presentation touching up a lot of different subjects from urban land use planning policies to pricing of roads and parking space to public transport investment under the clean development mechanism and fuel economy policies, standards, and fuel economy for vehicles. So that makes a very broad array of different kind of topics, and I believe part of the issue we are confronting here is finding ways to disentangle those various topics so that they can be dealt with on a separate basis, and then the solutions being recombined in a way which makes sense. And which makes sense also in a developing country context. And I'd like there to quote a remark which was made this morning during the workshop on changing passengers' behavior. One panelist, as we were discussing the green cities, one panelist mentioned that in some circles, and in some circles of city policymakers, there was still the belief that when a city goes green, it becomes less competitive economically. So translate this line of thought at a developing country level, and you'll certainly find governments in developing countries today worrying that while they are pushed to take action on climate change, this may actually hamper their economic competitiveness on the world market. Now, that's obviously something we don't want to happen. We believe there is a need to reconcile clearly the necessity to address climate change issue while still guaranteeing that growth can actually continue to proceed. So just a bit of commercial here. The World Bank actually issued last week, May 21st, its transport business strategies, which covering the next 5 years, which is called Safe, Clean, and Affordable Transport for Development. And it does include as one of its strategic objectives, transport and climate change, mitigation, adaptation policy. So that's obviously at the very forefront of our concerns today. In terms of protocol, we'll have 3 main presentations to entertain the discussion. I suggest that those presentations take maximum 15 minutes each, and after each of this presentation, I'll give the floor to our panel of core discussants and then to the audience. And those 3 sequences should lead us to the coffee break around 3:30, and after the coffee break, we'll have a 4th presentation which will bring together most of those discussions and hopefully help us reach a kind of consensus as to the policy forward. All right, just to lay out the ground for the discussion, I'd like to share with you a few quick considerations, a couple of maps that you will see on the screen there. First, this global evidence that I believe, well, to be kept in mind, that energy intensity, that's a very mixed picture, even within emerging economies, that there are wide differences in energy consumptions per head. CO2 emissions from transport, it's already high for some important emerging economies, but there are very large differences in modes. And there are a few maps which are actually just reflecting all the data you can find in the UNFCCC reports. Greenhouse gas emissions per GDP at purchase power parity. I not want to comment those maps, just to show them so that you see what the situation is basically. GHG emission here focusing on the ASEAN region. Here is basically a map showing in absolute figures CO2 emissions from the transport sector. And that's really 1 million tons on CO2. So that clearly shows where those emissions are taking place and where they are actually still very limited. But in the regions where they are limited, they are typically growing. And the last one, which actually shows how many differences there are actually between regions and between modes in terms of growth. That's basically show that the only subsector mode in the only region which has shown any reduction since 2000 is actually the two-wheelers mode in OECD Europe. And apart from that, everything else is growing, but at quite different paces across regions. So that's what I just wanted to submit.